During the 1980s, the people who taught geography thought, well, maybe we should change kind of how we teach the discipline, kind of shed it in a much better light. And so what they did was they came out with the 5 themes of geography. And so every K through 12 geography course should have talked about the 5 themes of geography. And so since some of you have taken geography before, what are they? And I asked that question knowing that probably no one's going to know the answer. But the 5 themes of geography are location, place, human-environment interaction, movement, and region, all of which we're going to talk about now. And so now we're going to look at location. And so there's 2 main ways we can look at location. First off, absolute location. So absolute location, key to that is it marks an exact spot, an exact location on Earth's surface. So think of this like Battleship. I haven't played Battleship in a while, but B3 marks an exact spot on the Battleship game. Another way to illustrate this is latitude and longitude coordinates. And so 56 degrees north, 47 degrees west is an exact location. Another example would be an address. And so where you live, where you work, where your office might be, has an address. And so that also marks an absolute location or an exact spot. Even further, global positioning systems. And so these are becoming much more commonly used. They're in our cars, they're on our phones, and those also are ways we can measure or mark an exact spot or an absolute location. This is different than relative location. Relative location is more kind of described by landmarks, and so distance or direction from another place. And so, where is the RCA Dome? Well, it's on the southwest side. Actually, it's no longer here. Where is Lucas Oil? Well, it's on the southwest side, over by Victory Field. It's its relative location. I didn't rattle off the address for the stadium. I didn't rattle off the latitude and longitude. I kind of described, well, it's relative location, relative kind of how close or near or far it is from other landmarks. And so relative location, more going to be measuring distance and direction, whereas absolute location is more describing an exact location. And so every time you swipe your credit card, an absolute location is given. And so if you look at your receipt, you'll see an address. But even more specifically, you'll actually see the credit card machine number at the address that you used your credit card at. And so then what people can do with this, what businesses and companies is kind of understand more about your consumption habits, understanding the kind of the things that you buy, where you go to shop, and so forth. And so although you don't know this, your actions are being monitored and trying to be understood so that then that can be turned into eventually profit. So once they can capture you as a customer and understand more your tastes and your traits. An interesting thing is I have a watch that has a GPS on it. And so the other day I went for a run, and so here's the path I went. I then took my data, I uploaded it to Google, and it kicked out this map that showed the path that I took when I ran. And so this marked my absolute location over time, over my run, the course of my run. So this would be a way to measure absolute location. The second theme of geography that we're going to look at is place. So place is the unique physical and human characteristics that make up a location. And so one of the things that we're going to do a lot is use images. And so we're going to do some photo interpretation. So we're going to try to understand images of a location on Earth and try to understand what is going on there. One of the difficult things regarding places is they vary in size. And so when we talk about places, we have very much different scales and much different sizes. For instance, we're going to talk about cities, towns, maybe villages or neighborhoods. We can talk about smaller places like a dorm or a house or even Kavanaugh Hall. And so all of these are examples of places, but obviously they all vary in the size. And so we're going to look at some images here. And so we're going to look at ways we can kind of interpret photos and try to read the landscape or interpret what the image is showcasing. What kind of insights can we gain from just looking at this simple image here? And so first off, what can you tell me about this house? Where is this house? And one of the things is you can tell that this house was probably built before the automobile era. Why? No garages. You don't see any garages in this on this house. Other things, the open front porch, the breezeway, kind of gives the insights that this could be from the South. You look at architecture in the South, it tends to have a large front breezeway. Why? Because it's so freaking hot in the summertime, and this now allows a comfortable place to leave, especially when we think about, supper time, all the heat from the kitchen getting trapped in that house. It can be very, very miserable in the summertime. Other things that you can tell is this was probably built before electricity. You can see that as far as the thing sticking out the windows, the AC units, and so this was built before air conditioning technology really advanced. And knowing more about this place, this is where I lived. This is where I lived when I went to school in University of Tennessee, Knoxville, i.e. where Peyton went to school. And this one house, at the time, back in the 1800s and early 1900s, would have served a couple families, would have had servants who would have lived in the bottom and who would also be working in this house. Very, very wealthy. Now it's divided up into 9 small apartments for very not so wealthy college students. And so we can also kind of understand the change of time, how this used to be kind of a very wealthy area, and now it's essentially what we call a student ghetto for University of Tennessee. Which one of these houses do you think the professor lives in, and which one do you think the student rents? And so looking at places, this is North Wilkesboro Speedway, one of the places where NASCAR used to have a lot of its roots, a lot of its races at. And so if we see this picture here, you see kind of a lot of these open fields that surround the racetrack. These would have been filled with campers, filled with cars. And so two NASCAR events each year used to be hosted at this speedway here in this very small rural town in near the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina. And so for this city, for this town, this was very, very, very important economically, but also culturally. And so just imagine how full everything would be during these large NASCAR events. And here's an image from back in the day at North Wilkesboro, one of the 1990s, in which Jeff Gordon was racing Dale Earnhardt here, and full crowd, and so all these people you see here would go to local restaurants, they would camp out, and so huge economic benefit to this area, huge economic impact. However, if we look at this place today, we can see the impact of NASCAR no longer racing here. And so one of the first things you see when you come off the highway is this gas station, which is now abandoned because it relied heavily on the traffic from the 2 race weekends that NASCAR had here at North Wilkesboro. Even more so looking at this place. This is even closer to the speedway. One of the things, if you look at this is more of a modern looking gas station, a more modern service station here that once again, this is where you go for ice, this is where you go for beer, this is where you go for milk, this is where you would go for all those essentials and gas up and fill up during your weekend. Now that that's no longer there, you can see how this place economically has really started to deteriorate due to the loss of NASCAR. And so here's another place along Speedway Road just outside the track. And so now a house has replaced what once was a gas station. You can see a mailbox next to a gas pump in this. And what we see here is a smaller go-kart track, which is located right next to North Wilkesboro Speedway. So this track here would have been littered with kids and families and parents. And so now it's starting to rust, and you're starting to see the weeds come through and so forth. And so this used to be a community building area in which people would interact with each other here at these NASCAR events. And so now those endless fields that used to be nothing but cars and campers for these races right next to the track are now just a place to dump and temporary house some mobile homes that we see here. So this area, you can actually see the old pathways in which still left over from those last few races at North Wilkesboro Speedway. This image taken in 2005, the last race being there in 1996. And so I'd like to ask this question: what is the image of Indianapolis? And so, even if you're not from here, how would you describe Indianapolis in one sentence? How would you describe Indianapolis as a place? And one of the things I'm interested in is how cities identify themselves. How do they market themselves? How do they view themselves? What are the things that they want to sell to outside viewers? And so when we look at what Indianapolis thinks Indianapolis's image is, in this image here on the website, this is the Indianapolis Convention and Visitors Association homepage, you can see this phrase, raising the game. What that is really kind of focusing in is two things. First off, Indianapolis is trying now to compete with the big boys. And so one of the things we see with Lucas Oil and with the Convention Center is Indianapolis is trying to raise its game, raise its level. It no longer wants to compete with the Clevelands, the Columbuses. It wants to compete with the Chicagos, the Las Vegases, the Washington, D.C.s. Another thing with the term game, Indianapolis is very much a sports city. So one of the things is Indianapolis tries to host a lot of sporting events, i.e. the Super Bowl that's coming, the Final Four, but also the NCAA headquarters, which we see here in this image on the upper left. And so it's also insinuating kind of its brand as far as being a sports city that hosts major sporting events. And so raising the game is kind of insinuating a couple different things. And so when we look at how Indianapolis views itself, its own place, we can kind of see these themes. And so what I want you to do is for the Module 1 discussion forum is to add a post that talks about where you come from. I know that's not good English, but whatever. And so what I want you to do is kind of describe your place. Describe your hometown, the place that you know the best. And so I want you to describe the physical characteristics, but also the human characteristics, much like I've kind of looked at North Wilkesboro and looked at Indianapolis. And so I offered my forum post. You can see Greenwood, Indiana, and use that as a kind of a good framework for what I'm looking for in that post. The third theme of geography that we're going to talk about is human-environment relationships. And so this is very much a growing area in which people are trying to understand human our impact on the environment, but also how we kind of have to, over time, adapt and depend on the environment. And so that gets us to our definition, which is kind of humans depend on, adapt to, and modify the environment. And so one of the things, this is, a lot of times when we look at this, we look at kind of the negative impact, kind of how deforestation and, global warming, all these various phenomenon. But we also, in many ways, kind of use the environment, use our natural environment to improve human life. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we look at medical geography. So one way we can illustrate human-environment relationships is looking at population density in Africa. And it really speaks to how humans in Africa have had to adapt to the environment. And so what this shows is population density. So the areas that have the most amount of red or the darkest color are the areas that have the highest amount of people living in that area. And so the areas I circled here are the areas of high population density. And so why do so many people live in this area? Why do very few people live in the wide areas? Well, a lot of this has to do with the local climate and the local environment, the physical environment, which becomes quite apparent when we throw in now a satellite map. And so first off, up in the upper right-hand corner, we see the Nile River. And so in an area of desert, the Nile River provides a river source that provides agriculture, provides transportation, and so forth. In the upper left, we see a mountain range. And so this is an area that's very much clustered. It's a little bit cooler up in the higher elevated areas, but also along the coast. It's very European, and so you kind of have that Europe connection up in the top. Other areas of the map we see, if you know anything about Africa, especially Central Africa, it is super hot. But there's two areas there, Ethiopia and Nigeria. Those two middle areas, one of the things about those, they're a little bit elevated. They have a little bit higher, got some mountain ranges, so that provides a little bit of cooling temperatures. Also, you see the bottom cluster there along Lake Victoria, and so that once again provides an agricultural source as far as irrigation. Also provides a resource as far as fish, but also transportation. So we can understand the physical environment and at the same time understand where people live in Africa and how they've adapted to the local environment. And so, depending on the environment, we can see that here, this is very much, this could be taken out of who knows where in the Great Plains of the United States. And so, one of the things here you see an entire field of one crop. You also see two workers, one driving one massive truck, the other one driving another massive truck / tractor. And so here, the agricultural the way we do agriculture here in the United States, very mechanized, doesn't need a lot of people, and it's very much one crop, and it's typically, this isn't all feeding these two guys or gals' families. This is overwhelmingly going to feed livestock, or go to our, if this is wheat, going to our breads or maybe our beers. So we see a different way that we depend on the environment here in the United States compared to the next image, where we see what we call subsistence agriculture. And so here you see much more human labor being used. You don't see the tractors, you don't see the trucks. You also see more variety, less of that one crop. And also these people are feeding themselves. They're feeding their own communities. So we see much different ways in which people have depended on and have adapted to their environment. And so looking at modifying the environment, here you see in the south kudzu. And so kudzu was originally seen as something that was very much decorative, very, very kind of almost a symbol of wealth. And so you had kudzu, you'd plant it, and it'd cover your trellis, and it'd provide shade in the summertime. Then fast forward to the Great Depression, and we heavily agriculturalize and overuse the land, and so it becomes eroded and you kind of remove a lot of the vegetation. And so as we were building highways, we had a lot of erosion along the interstates, and so what they did was they planted kudzu. And so kudzu was kind of this fast-growing vine that would kind of quickly cover up barren spaces to prevent erosion. However, the net impact of that was this stuff grew like mad here in the South. And so kudzu is what it's done is it's really kind of modified the local environment as it quickly grows like a foot a day. And what it does is it quickly grows and covers the nearby vegetation, and then preventing sunlight and eventually killing off that vegetation. So you're seeing kudzu, which is becoming quite the pest in the South. And so kudzu is very difficult to get rid of because it grows so fast. And also, if I can go in there, I can weed eat to the root. But the problem is the root's still there, and so it doesn't get rid of the problem. And so in Chattanooga, what they've done is they've turned the goats loose. And so they turn a lot of goats loose because what the goats do is they attack the root. They go after the root of the kudzu. However, there's not enough goats to keep up with the kudzu growth. Further, looking at how we've adapted depending on and modify the environment, we see 4 different architectures. And so I want you to try to identify where each of the 4 homes are located in the United States. And you'd find that number 1, top left-hand corner, probably somewhere in the Mountain West. Number 2, somewhere in New England. Number 3, somewhere in the Southwest. And number 4, somewhere in the Southeast. Going back to number 1, you can see it's made of wood because there's a lot of timber nearby. Also, you can see how it has a lot of these large windows on the south portion of the house. That's because it gets obviously kind of cold in the summer or in the wintertime, and so what ends up happening is the sun comes. It's in our southern horizon here in the northern hemisphere here in the United States, and so that sun being down at the southern part of the house provides more light, provides more natural heating for this area during the wintertime. Up in the upper right, if you know anything about New England, its climate can be brutal. It can be wet and damp, and it can be very, very bitterly cold in the wintertime. And so you don't see that, a nice open front porch. You don't see a lot of architecture that's, ornate. You see, an architecture that's very durable and built to withstand a very harsh climate. Going down to the bottom left, we see southwestern architecture, and so in the southwest you don't see a lot of timber, you don't see a lot of vegetation, And so what they've had to do is use mud. And so they use the actually dried earthened works to create the walls and the structures for their habitat here. And then bottom right, in the south, it can be extremely hot in the summertime, especially if you have some kitchen and adding heat as you cook. And so what they've done is they've developed this architectural characteristic of these wide open breezeways, or these wraparound porches, which provide a much more comfortable location than being in the inside part of the house, where it's obviously very, very, very warm. And so another way that humans have depend on, adapt to, and modify the environment is building cities, building canals, building river walks, building skyscrapers, building subdivisions, building neighborhoods, and so forth. One of the focuses we'll definitely end the semester with is talking about human impact on the environment. So what this is an image of Beijing, China, on an overcast day in which the clouds are coming in and so forth. And this is Beijing, China, on a sunny day. And so what happened here was pollution. It was downwind from various large industries. Because the wind was blowing a certain direction, it blew that air pollution into Beijing, China. So this is actually a sunny day that we're looking at, where the previous image was a cloudy day. And so we can see the impact of humans in terms of air pollution in this instance. Our fourth theme of geography is movement. So we'll be looking at the movement of people, goods, and ideas overwhelmingly. So we'll be looking at transportation, trade, the internet, and just information and communication in general. So one of the things that companies are trying to do is trying to save costs. And so I had a moving company that moved my stuff from Knoxville to Indianapolis. And this was a large nationwide company. And so what they did was they took my stuff up to Huntington, West Virginia. Found this very interesting. What they did was they said, well, your stuff will be in Indianapolis sometime between August 3rd and August 9th. And so what they did was they took all my stuff to Huntington, West Virginia, because they were waiting for a bigger truck to come through that would take my stuff up to Indianapolis. And so what they waited on was a truck from Washington, D.C. that was carrying all kinds of stuff to the west, and also carrying that stuff to Chicago was its next stop. And so they just found a nice way to pick up my stuff in Huntington and then bring it with that shipment up to Chicago and then dropping it off in Indianapolis. And so logistically, that saved them a lot of money. And so understanding movement is becoming more critical for businesses as far as ways to save costs, especially those in the transportation industry, like FedEx. And so FedEx, obviously, very much a logistics company who's interested in movement, interested in ways where it can minimize costs. And so we have different scales, different levels of FedEx. We got obviously the airplane, which can take in massive amount of goods and take them from one side of the country to another, going down to as small as the van, which is something that will, can be very, very quick as far as how quickly products can get to you, but also has much smaller batches, much smaller amounts that it can carry. And a good way to illustrate movement is this image here, where we see a Chinese individual, or if someone of Chinese descent, who's picking up urban America hip-hop culture. And so here we see the movement of ideas, in this case hip-hop music, which has moved obviously from its origins in Harlem to all points throughout the world, in this case Asia. This image here has a lot of movement going on. We obviously have movement of race cars, but we have movement as far as people. We have people coming from all over the country, all over the world, to this event here in Indianapolis. You also have the movement of this form of racing, of this event, via the media. And so the fact that this is telecasted all throughout the world. This is then also at the same time showcasing Indianapolis. It's putting Indianapolis on the lexicon. It's putting Indianapolis on the map globally, as far as people say, I know Indianapolis. It's a place that race. So we see various movement going on here in this image. They're watching you. They're watching your movement. They know where you're going. They know where you're shopping. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but every time you swipe, it showcases places that you've gone, the absolute location, but also can track kind of your movement as you go from place to place and place. And businesses and companies and retailers love this data, especially now that this data is much more readily available. And our last theme that we're going to talk about is regions. And there's three different types of regions that we're going to talk about. The first one is a formal region. A formal region is marked by sameness or homogeneity in one or few phenomenon. And so what this is there's something about this region that's unique, and it's just one or a few different things. For instance, French Canada, the Quebec part of Canada, French Canada. Well, what is it? What is it that makes that a region separate from the other part of Canada? Language. The old cotton belt. And so the old cotton belt or the corn belt or the wheat belt are also examples of formal regions in which there's one or a few things that makes that region unique and different from the neighboring regions. Another one is the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, which we'll look at here in a minute. Also the Mormon region. So if I ask you, where is the Mormon region in the United States, you could probably say, well, probably somewhere in Utah, probably somewhere there in the Great Basin, the western part of the country, would be the Mormon region. Was definitely that kind of that focus there in Salt Lake City. So here, the religion is the kind of that homogeneity, that one phenomenon that makes the Mormon region different from outside regions. And so here's a map that showcases different formal regions. We have the old cotton belt there in the south, the corn belt, the wheat belts, and so forth. And so when we look at formal regions, there's one or a few things that makes these regions unique and different from the other regions. And so this is a map that shows where different religions are practiced in the United States, are kind of more focused. And so we can see the purple out in the west, the kind of what I was talking about, the Mormon region. You can see kind of the Spanish Catholic influence in the southwest. You can see the French Catholic down in Louisiana. In the south, big-time Baptist down there in what we call the Bible Belt. You see kind of more of a focus of Catholic faith in the kind of the Great Plain, or sorry, the near the Great Lakes, the northern part. A lot of Catholic churches there. Then in the upper New England part, also very much Catholic. You can see Lutherans are there in Minnesota and South Dakota. And so what we're doing is these are different formal regions based on one or a few phenomenon, the one phenomenon being religion. And so these would also be, formal regions, we could say. And so we could say kind of how the South is kind of a formal region based on its similarity for voting for McCain, or maybe the Upper Great Lakes, or maybe New England, or the Pacific West Coast, which is very much Democratic strongholds. So you can kind of see and delineate these formal regions based on, in this case, who people voted for in the 2008 election. This map here is delineating what we call the Rust Belt. And so what makes this area unique is the fact that it has a lot of industry that's no longer there. And so when we talk about, the steel industry, we talk about the car industry, we talk about, rubber, tires, all the various industries that used to dominate this area are no longer. And so this is an area that has kind of the similarity of deindustrialization, of high industry, heavy manufacturing, iron mining, and so forth. This region here is the Sun Belt. And so what are some characteristics of this region, some one or a few phenomena you see here is the first off climate. Obviously the name implies it's going to have a nice, comfortable climate. Also, what we got going on here is where we saw deindustrialization in the Rust Belt, you're now seeing industrialization down here in the Sun Belt. And so one of the things is this area, all throughout the red area, has been gaining in jobs over the last 10, 15 years. And so here is an area where you see a lot of industry is now clustering. So you see auto manufacturers coming down here, biotechnology firms, medical device companies, insurance companies, yada, yada, yada. And so one of the things that marks this area, which makes it a formal region, is the fact that it has a nice climate, but it also is a growing area economically, but also in terms of industry and jobs. The aforementioned Mormon region. One of the things geographers love is our belts. I own 3 of them myself. But belts are different ways we can describe regions or characteristics, like the Bible Belt we've heard before, the Corn Belt, the old Cotton Belt. And so here we have a map focuses in on Europe. And I want to see if you can try to guess what type of belt this is. Maybe post in the chat room or in the discussion forum what you might think this is. And so in some instances we can say that countries are also examples of formal regions. You know, they all have a common constitution, they all have common laws, and so there's the shared nationalism, so there's some similarities. So one or a few phenomena, could be government, constitution, that makes countries also examples of formal regions. The second type of region is a functional region, which has a dynamic internal structure. And so it's very much, there you see, as functional integration, which I'm going to explain here with the next few slides. Key to a functional region is it's focused on a central core that serves a surrounding periphery. And so think of this as Indianapolis. Metro Indianapolis is a functional region. It has a central core, the downtown Indianapolis, you could say, that is served or also serves the surrounding periphery. So you could say, you know, the rest of Marion County, the surrounding counties, you know, Greenwood, Martinsville, Carmel, the surrounding cities, Lafayette, Anderson, with all, you know, which people kind of that work and commute daily within this functional region. One of the things about a functional region, it's very difficult to draw boundaries around because there isn't really, you can't really say that, well, this is where Metro Indianapolis stops, because obviously you're going to have people who might be commuting from further out than that line. So you're not going to see these kind of these perfect boundaries like you might have saw with the formal regions. Some examples: metropolitan Indianapolis, media markets. So think about, you know, the Indianapolis Star. The Indianapolis Star serves a certain area, whereas the Louisville paper, whatever it is, serves the Louisville area, and the Cincinnati paper serves the Cincinnati area, Chicago Tribune, Chicago, and so on. Also television markets. You know, where do we see our newscasters? You know, where do we see them hosting the news? We see them downtown in Indy. We see them hosting it in Indianapolis. You don't see news from, you know, news from Columbus, Lafayette. I don't think they have their own news, but you see them. You know, they're going to be watching Indianapolis news. They're going to be watching WTHR, WTTV, or WRTV, or all the various media that you see here in Indianapolis. And so what I've done is I've kind of drawn roughly some functional regions. I mean, once again, these aren't really perfect boundaries. You can't have perfect boundaries with functional regions. But these are kind of these major metropolitan areas or these media markets that you would find here. And so if you live in Columbus, you might be getting the Louisville news, or you might also get the Indianapolis news. If you're out in Greensburg, I know in Greensburg they get a lot of Cincinnati news. Also, they get Indianapolis news. And so a lot of times you'll get two CBSs or two NBCs as you're getting the Cincinnati and the Indianapolis affiliates. And so this is kind of a way to illustrate functional regions and where you kind of see some overlap. But pretty much those who live in Greenwood, Franklin, you know, Danville, Lebanon, those people are going to be much more tied to Indianapolis, and so they're going to be watching Indianapolis news, but also be having, you know, typically having their occupations in the functional region of Indianapolis, rather than, you know, having going all the way up to Fort Wayne to work from Greenwood and so forth. Even further, looking at media markets, I found a map that shows the different areas that saw different games at 4:15 on November 2nd, 2008. And so the entire red area was the game between the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants. And so the Dallas Cowboys are seen as kind of as America's team, very popular throughout the country. The blue area, that's Philadelphia Eagles versus Seattle Seahawks. And so those are the two areas that are probably the most interested in that game. And so those are the only media markets that were covering the Eagles versus the Seahawks. The green areas is the Raiders versus the Falcons, so Oakland versus Atlanta. And so we can see media markets, functional regions, in this case, when we look at the NFL on Fox. The last region is the vernacular region, the last of the three. And so this is more defined by human perceptions, and it's more defined by human perceptions of those from that region. And so this can be quite varied. Some examples. I just came from Big Orange Country. And so most people don't know what Big Orange Country is, but Big Orange Country would be the kind of what people in East Tennessee, near Knoxville, call themselves. You see this all over billboards, "Welcome to Big Orange Country." And so this is very much, the perceptions of the people who live there, as far as being, the home of University of Tennessee and the athletic programs, whether it be Lady Vol basketball or UT football. Another example you hear is the Dirty South. What is the Dirty South? Well, I don't know what the Dirty South is, but I know in hip-hop they know what the Dirty South is. Also, Dixie. Dixie's another one that's it's based on human perceptions of people from Dixie. They know what Dixie is because they're the ones that say, "Hey, welcome to Dixie." Another example, personal. And so when I was growing up in high school, you just kind of would just cruise around just to drive just for the hell of it. And so down in Johnson County, there's this area we called Podunk. And it's kind of this middle of nowhere rural area. And so it was just a few of us who came up with this our perceptions of this area. We called it Podunk. Also, you hear the term the sticks, referring to rural areas. Also, you could say the American Midwest is a vernacular region. It's kind of depends on who you talk to. And I got some examples to follow. And so here we see various vernacular regions. Because the person who made this map, the cartographer, what they did was they took a survey. And so they took survey of people from all over, various zip codes, and they asked them, which team are you a fan of? And so they kind of developed these sports fan regions based on people's perceptions of whether or not they are in Royal country or in Reds country or in Cubs country, whatever. And so what is the American Midwest? What states would you include in the Midwest region? And so here we see what the census calls the Midwest. The census says anywhere from Ohio to Kansas up to North Dakota would be part of the Midwest. Whereas the Amphibian Research and Monitoring Initiative, part of the USGS, they include Kentucky into the Midwest. I wouldn't include Kentucky in the Midwest, but this is, once again, a vernacular region. What is the Midwest? Well, it's whatever human perceptions of the Midwest are. We can look at Midwest Airlines as far as where is its hubs. You see hubs in Milwaukee, Kansas City, and so that would be probably what they would refer to the Midwest as kind of these areas surrounding these various hubs. And so one of the things is the NCAA headquarters share actually a boundary with IUPUI's campus. And so one of the things that frustrates me is no one over there is educated as far as what a region is, and especially what directions are. Some examples of this. The NCAA tournament has various regions. And so they call there are 4 different regions that compete in the NCAA tournament. And so in 1979, the Mideast region was located in Indianapolis, whereas the Midwest region was located in Cincinnati. So Indianapolis, which is west of Cincinnati, was called Mideast, whereas Cincinnati was called the Midwest. Obviously, they should have taken my class. Oh, we're not done with them yet. 1987, the Midwest regional was in Cincinnati. The Southeast region was in Louisville. So once again, a place that's west of Cincinnati was called Southeast, and then Cincinnati was called Midwest. Another screwy one. The South region in 1990 was hosted in Richmond, whereas the East region was hosted in Atlanta. And that concludes this Vodcast. Please move on to Module 1.4.